Holy shit. Okay, so, um, where do I even start with this? Uh, I will say, this might be the fastest that a book has gripped me and made me fully invested in every element of it. Probably since I read the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Like, this was a immediate, like, attention grabber of an opening section. Um, You'll remember I talked in my video about Gideon the Ninth that the plot of Gideon the Ninth is not necessarily super impressive to me. It's not like my favorite part of the book. There are other elements of the book I really enjoy, and the plot is just kind of functional. It's just there to deliver the prose and the characters. Um, that is not the case here. And it's not because the prose and the characters have gotten worse. In fact, they've gotten better. Uh, but the plot is so interesting and so compelling in this one, at least to me personally. Um, this is uh, this is one of the most impressive jumps in quality I've seen in a while between two books in a series. Um, and especially considering that the first book was already really good. Like, I really enjoyed the first book, but this is such a huge jump in quality, at least, in these first, how many pages? First 135 pages. So, nothing but praise for this first section. Um, so let's talk about what's going on here, and some of my theories and some of my predictions. First of all, I do want to say, the people who say that this book is, like, really, really difficult to follow and confusing, so far, no. At least not to me. Maybe that part comes later, but so far, I feel like I'm following, and I'm fascinated. That doesn't mean that I understand everything that's going on, but it means that the things I don't understand, I feel like I'm not supposed to understand. And I don't feel like it detracts from my enjoyment that I don't understand them. In fact, it adds to it. Um, okay, full spoilers from this point on. There's a lot to talk about here. First of all, Harrow as a character is fascinating to be inside the head of, because Harrow is, well, I don't like to refer to people this way, but she says it, so I guess that's how I'll say it. She is insane. She is not lucid all the time. She hallucinates. She has false memories. She has false. She sees things that aren't there. She hears things that aren't there, and it's not always made clear by the book which things that happen actually happen, and which things are just something in her head. And that, I think, it's handled really well here, I think. Sometimes it's very subtle. Like, sometimes the hints that something that is happening isn't actually happening will be pretty subtle. And then, of course, the thing is, the book never fully, at least so far, never fully gives you, like, conclusive evidence that anything that she sees isn't real. Like, that's kind of the interesting trick here. For example, the corpse. The corpse, or the body as she calls it, which is the body from the body of the girl from the locked tomb, which she sees everywhere, following her around. Very specifically, I've noticed that, as far as I can tell, the body never clips through people. Like, people don't walk through her. When she's sitting in a chair, people don't sit in the chair, and if they do sit in the chair, by the time they do, she's no longer there. And this makes me feel like there's at least some possibility being left here that this is not a hallucination, and that there is actually this woman who's just present in all these scenes and no one can see her, or no one is acknowledging her, maybe even, except Harrow. I'm not 100%. I'm not claiming that's the case. That's not necessarily my prediction for the rest of the book, but that's an example of how the writing style and the choices that Tamsin Muir makes in what to show and what not to show, and what to narrate and what not to narrate, leaves this sort of delightful ambiguity about some things, which adds to the mystery of the book. But of course, I'm sort of avoiding talking about the big thing here, which is that Gideon, the character, and also the book, has been retconned out of existence. Not by Tamsin Muir, but as far as I can tell, by Harrow somehow. So, as far as Harrow remembers, Gideon died as a child as part of the mass child sacrifice to create Harrow. And Ortus Niganad, Nijanad, I'm not sure. Ortus was Harrow's cavalier, and Ortus went with her to Canaan House, and presumably she absorbed Ortus's soul to become a lictor. And here's the thing about that. There are two possibilities here. One, this is something in Harrow's head. Essentially, she, horrified at what's happened with Gideon and unable to bear her own guilt and responsibility for it, has essentially constructed this false reality that she chooses to live in. So she doesn't have to confront what happened with Gideon. That's one possibility. And the main argument against this possibility is the fact that other characters also refer to her cavalier as Ortus, specifically the Emperor does. And also that, so one of the lictors is named Ortus, except he's not, because I remember from the previous book that Gideon was named after a lictor, I'm pretty sure. So I'm pretty sure that cavalier's name is supposed to be Gideon. So either Harrow's delusion is so severe that, like, people are saying the name Gideon around her, but she hears Ortus, like her brain blocks out the name Gideon. Which is somewhat borne out by the fact that in those two scenes, when Ortus the lictor shows up, and when the Emperor mentions Ortus, her cavalier, in both of those scenes, Harrow basically responds to hearing the name by fainting, which I think is a hint that, you know, she's actually hearing the name Gideon, but her brain shuts down instead of accepting that. So that's one possibility, but there is the other possibility, which is that the past has actually been changed. That Harrow did something, some sort of insanely high-level magical thing, presumably with Ianthe, because Ianthe has, like, some sort of weird connection with her and, like, a deal, a contract. And that whatever Harrow did actually literally changed the past. I think this is less likely, in part because the lictor's name changed. If the lictor was still named Gideon, but Ortus was named Ortus, that I think would point to this second theory. But the fact that the lictor's name is Gideon makes me think that she's just sort of retconning it in her own head, if that makes sense. Because I feel like there would be no reason to change the lictor's name, assuming she had this godlike power to change the past somehow. I'm assuming there would be no reason to actually change the lictor's name, just change who the Cavalier was. So I'm going to assume for now that Harrow herself is just that it's all in her head. That when the Emperor said Ortus's name, he actually said the name Gideon on both occasions, both when he was referring to the lictor and when he was referring to her Cavalier. That said, however, whatever the case, I think I might prefer the false timeline, because as much as I love Gideon, the flashbacks to a world that never was, in which Ortus torments the entire cast of the first book with his terrible epic poetry, is delightful. I love those chapters. I love those scenes. They're so good. They're just very amusing chapters. And I really like that they're played for comedy. Like, that's a really fun thing to do. Like, have these eerie scenes that are eerie by virtue of depicting a version of events that we as readers know isn't what happened, but then having them be essentially the comic relief scenes of the book is a really interesting choice, and I think it really works tonally. However, this book would be already incredibly interesting and compelling if that was all that was going on here, if the only thing we had to think about was what was going on inside Harrow's head. But there's actually a lot more at play here. So first of all, the body counts from the first book don't make sense. We are told which bodies were recovered, which bodies weren't recovered at the start, and the fact that the Cavalier from the 6th house is missing, that makes sense, because she did in fact survive. We know that she's alive. I mean, she did not die at the end of the first book, from what I remember. So it makes perfect sense that her body is missing. However, it's also mentioned that one of the 2 women from the 2nd house is missing. I don't remember their names, to be honest. But I don't think it's mentioned which one is missing, so it could be the Cavalier or the Necromancer. But both of them, from what I remember, died on screen in the first book. So the missing body is interesting. Unless I'm forgetting something. Was one of their bodies, like, destroyed? I could be reading too much into that. There could be more there. Or there could not be. I'm genuinely not sure. So we've got, but, you know, even if that's not a mystery, we do still have the mystery of the Cavalier from the 6th, whose, again, name I forget. And we have the mystery of Coronabeth, who is also missing, although Ianthe swears she's alive. And then we have the mystery of the pact/contract that Harrow made with Ianthe, and the mysterious letters that Harrow sent to her alternate future self, I guess. Which, it said there's like 22 letters. I highly doubt we'll get to see all of them, but I kind of want to see all of them. I'm hoping we eventually get to see all of them, actually. But yeah, there's a lot of mysteries here, specifically relating to, like, the very brief period of time between the first and the second book, because this book picks up, like, I think, like, maybe 2 weeks or something after the end of the previous book. Like, there's not a big time skip, and yet it seems like the entirety of this book is just going to be a bunch of mysteries about what happened during that brief time skip, which is interesting. Now, Harrow is not the only interesting character here, however, because we also have a smaller, at least so far, cast than in the first book, which I think is good, because it allows that cast to be much better developed. Uh, the main players so far are Ianthe, Mercy, and the Emperor. And at the end of this section, we're introduced to Augustine and Ortis. Ortis, whose that name is actually Gideon. Um, but I don't really know anything about those two yet. So I'm going to focus on Ianthe, the Emperor, and Mercy. So Ianthe has a really weird dynamic with Harrow. Um, I'm trying to remember from the first book. I don't think Ianthe and Harrow interacted a ton in the first book. To be fair, I don't think Harrow really interacted a ton with anyone in the first book. She mostly kept to herself. Um, which might mean actually that going into this book, I know Ianthe better than Harrow does. That would be interesting. Um, but Ianthe is it's kind of fun actually seeing the way Ianthe treats Harrow, because it's really similar to the way Harrow treated Gideon actually. Harrow is kind of getting a taste of her own medicine, I think, from Ianthe here. Sort of having committing acts of violence against her body just to make a point, being casually cruel and insulting with every word she utters. It's very much book one Harrow actually. And Harrow is in a vulnerable place, so she is susceptible to it. Which, like I said, I think that's an interesting little turning of the tables we've got there. But if Ianthe is an asshole to Harrow, what do we make of Mercy? Mercy is awful to Harrow, and to a lesser extent to Ianthe. But Mercy is very, very much a sort of hostile force, I think, in this book. Which doesn't necessarily mean she's going to stay that way. I wouldn't be surprised if either Ianthe or Harrow eventually win Mercy over. But so far, she is a fascinating antagonist. She is definitely an antagonist, but a fascinating one. And one of the reasons she's fascinating is because, unlike the Emperor, who is just like a regular guy in terms of his behavior most of the time, Mercy is written clearly in a way that is meant to communicate to us the sheer weight of the 10,000 years she has lived. She has forsaken many of the social norms, the behaviors, the mannerisms, even the emotions that one might expect from a regular person, not because she is fundamentally different in some way, but because she's lived for so long she no longer sees the need for them, or she's forgotten how to act like a normal person, which is really interesting. I always like immortal characters in fiction. Well, that's not true. I don't always like immortal characters. I like the idea, but I feel like they aren't always handled very well, in part because I think a lot of fiction that deals with immortality kind of takes it for granted that immortality is like straightforwardly a bad thing. Like, it's just a curse, not a blessing. And so you'll see characters who are like tormented by their immortality. And I think Mercy is to an extent, but I think she is also elevated by her immortality in a different way. I think it's a more nuanced portrayal that sort of shows both the positive and negative sides of immortality. She has become a less likable person because she's lived so long that she no longer seems to really relate to other people on the same level, and she sort of sees people as pawns or toys or just nuisances, which is obviously bad. But she's also shed a lot of the insecurities and like hang-ups that mortals have, because she doesn't need them anymore, and she's had millennia to get over them. So she is, in a way, she is both a more and less healthy individual, mentally speaking, due to her immortality. At least that's my read on her so far. We've only had her for a couple of chapters, so I could be totally misreading that. It's possible that this will be a less nuanced take on immortality, and that by the end of this book, the take will just be, oh, immortality is always bad, which a lot of fiction does. I hope that's not the case, because I feel like immortality can be good as well. I would very much like to be immortal, personally. That's a topic for another time. I have a lot of thoughts on immortality. Actually, it's like a topic I'm kind of obsessed with. Um, but Mercy is interesting in that respect, and John, or the Emperor, is interesting for kind of the opposite reason, which is that he seems rather unaffected by his immortality. Frankly, he acts way more normal than any character in this setting has ever acted, except for like the fifth house delegates from Canaan House. Like the two from the fifth were the only normal people in this series so far. And now the third normal person is the Emperor Undying of the universe, which is interesting. I wonder if we'll find out that he really is as normal as he appears, or if he's actually like a completely ineffable mind that he's just really good at acting and sort of pretending to be a fairly normal guy. Both would be interesting. I'm not particularly committed to one or the other idea. But speaking of John, he's apparently going to die. I say that because the book spoils it. The chapters are labeled, like the time at the beginning of each chapter is labeled by X month before the Emperor's murder. And the prologue is, I think, the night before the Emperor's murder. So I'm guessing that's how the book ends. Someone's gonna kill John. Although, frankly, with the way, with like this setting and the weird wonky way death works, it's possible that that's like a weird misdirection where he'll be murdered, but that won't actually mean he'll be dead. I'm curious to see where that, like, I'm curious to see whether that's as straightforward of a claim as it seems, that he will be murdered. I'm also obviously curious to see who will murder him. Because I feel like if he died battling the resurrection beast, you wouldn't call that murder, I think. I feel like in order for him to be murdered, it has to be someone like on his side, like a person working for him who like stabs him in the back. Maybe Harrow herself. I do expect that by the end of this book, Harrow will remember Gideon, of course. And I wonder if that's gonna be the thing. Like, I wonder if Harrow remembers what happened with Gideon and then blames John for it, and then like swears revenge and kills him for it. That could be one possible scenario. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to expect. It's still too early to tell where this book is going necessarily. However, there is another thing I want to talk about, and that is the world building here. So this section is chock full of world building, specifically when it comes to the magic system and the mythology of this world. We learn about the resurrection beasts, we learn about the river, we learn a lot more about the mechanics behind necromancy. We learn about thalurgy and thanergy and how planets die and all sorts of stuff that is really interesting and really unique. Like, the concepts that Tamsin Muir introduces here are just things I've never heard anywhere before in my life. I am just in awe of the originality sometimes. And in particular, I am in awe of the description of the process of passing through the river. Because we get a chapter here where John, Mercy, Yanthe, and Harrow are on a shuttle, and John sort of like planar shifts the shuttle into the river so that they can skip a great distance. And just the visuals of like the disgusting like water that's like filmy and filthy, like slowly filling up the shuttle as they're in space, and yet somehow there's like a rising water level, and then corpses slam into the shuttle from outside, and this is like the fast travel of the setting. It's really unique. I really like it, and the idea of fast traveling by dipping into the realm of the dead is just something I've also never heard of. There's a lot here, man. I have a lot of notes here. Let me just see if there's anything I really want to. Oh yeah. So as for the writing style, I was somewhat concerned at the start of this book that the absence of Gideon as narrator would mean that some of the more colorful and interesting elements of the tone of this series might be lost. But I shouldn't have been worried, because every character Tamsin Muir writes is a nightmare tangle of mimetic influences. And in particular, what I'm talking about here is that in the prologue of this book, the tone is immediately set by having this apocalyptic scene of like Harrow about to sacrifice herself to go into the river and fight a resurrection beast, and it's like all this grand high fantasy lingo going on around there. And then Yanthe walks into the room and she says in a deadpan voice, "Choke me, daddy." That broke me a little bit. When I read that, I had to put the book down for a while. I didn't even get 4 pages into the book before I had to put it down for the first time and take a break. Because, like I said, the tone is incomprehensible in the best way. In the best way. I love the way this is written. I don't think anything else could be written this way. Like, the entire book is like crafted to be perfect for its own tone. Now, a couple of minor details I noticed here that might come up later that I just want to sort of note. So, in the dramatis personae at the start, I did obviously notice that Ortus was capitalized and that his name replaced Gideon's. Although I didn't notice that at first because I'd forgotten that one of the lictors is supposed to be named Gideon. So I did notice that. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not 100% sure if I knew that one of the lictors was supposed to be named Gideon, or if I'm sort of like retroactively putting that together because this one is named Ortus now. Did I know that? Was that in the first book? I feel like that was in the first book. I feel like it was confirmed that she was named after a lictor. Oh well. But yeah, so I noticed that. But more importantly, in the dramatis personae, I noticed Anastasia the First, who is, I'm pretty sure, the lictor from the 9th house, because her her cavalier, who is also listed there, has a 9th house name. Anastasia the First stands out from the list of the other lictors because her name is not followed by the title Saint of the King Undying. Like all of the other, like, so here, like for example, it says Augustine the first saint to serve the King Undying. Mercymorn the first, second saint to serve the King Undying, and so forth and so forth. And then you get to Anastasia the first, and there's no second part of the title. It doesn't say, I think it should say, based on this list, it should say 8th saint to serve the King Undying. But she's not. Instead it skips to Ianthe, and she's listed as the 8th saint. So, if I had to guess, I would say that Anastasia the First is maybe the body in the locked tomb? Just because that's the only sort of person from the time of the resurrection that I know of who's unaccounted for. But that's just pure guesswork. I don't know that for sure, it's just a guess. The other thing I noticed, and Harrow actually pointed this out, so I know this is important. Harrow actually also noticed this. The Emperor's math doesn't check out. He says that there were 9 resurrection beasts. Then he says there are 3 left. Then he says we killed 5. So there's already 1 missing there, because 5 plus 3 is not 9. It's 8. And then he lists the ones they killed, and he only lists 3. So there's either 1 or 3 resurrection beasts who are totally unaccounted for in his list, for some reason. And Harrow, like I said, points this out in her narration, so I know that's not like an accident. I know that's important. I don't know why it's important. I'm just pointing out that I noticed it. The other thing I noticed is that the chapters in the quote-unquote present day are in second person, and the chapters taking place in the false memories of the first book are in third person. Which reminded me of another book. It reminded me of the first, well, actually all of the books of the Broken Earth trilogy, which I've already mentioned today. Funny how that works. And I'm not going to spoil why the different tenses are used in the Broken Earth trilogy, because I think that's like a really fun reveal there as well. But I have a theory about what's going on here. My theory is that we are going to learn that the person narrating this book is actually Gideon from inside Harrow. Like Gideon's mind or soul or whatever you want to say is narrating the events to Harrow, and that's why the events as they happen to Harrow are in second person. Because, of course, the first book was in third person, I think, right? I'm not crazy. The first book was in third person, right? I think I'd remember if it was in second. Second is really weird. Like, you don't see it very often. But yeah, yeah, that's my theory for what's gonna happen there. It's a bit of a shot in the dark, but I'm gonna commit to it. I'm gonna say that I firmly predict that the narrator of this book is Gideon. Somehow. I don't know how. What else? I mean, I could talk about how Harrow stabbed Cytherea's corpse at the end here, but I don't think so, because I'm sure that is going to be explained in the immediate next chapter I read, so never mind that. Yeah, so that was Harrow the Ninth, Act 1. One of the strongest starts to a book I've ever read. I am thoroughly hooked. I read this so fast, in just a couple of days. I've been making fantastic progress through this book. and I don't have any criticisms. I haven't said a single remotely bad thing about it, and that's because I have nothing bad to say. Maybe that will change. I hope not. I don't like saying negative things. I like being very positive. Um, when it's justified. And so far, this book has been justifying it. The fact that this is only Tamsin Weir's second book is incredible. Uh, like, if this is your second book, like, this person has the potential to become like one of my favorite authors of all time if this level of quality persists throughout this book and throughout the next book. Um, but I'll belay judgment. I am saying this only based on the first 135 pages. It's possible that the rest of the book is terrible. Who knows? Um, so that is all I have to say about this section of Harrow the Ninth. That's a lie. I have more. I think I have infinite things to say, but that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to go back to reading it right away because I desperately want to know what happens next. Um, I'm very excited by this book, very and very animated by it. Funnily enough, like a bone construct of some kind. That was a stretch. Sorry. Um, yeah. See you next week for more of the good shit. See ya. Bye.